It's 9:03 on the 11th of February 2022 in Beijing. Good morning. Good morning, Jen. Good evening to
Hi,
Americans.
good evening. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, it's the MTT News of the Week. Welcome. This week, or today, we will be covering Johnson & Johnson have switched production of their COVID vaccine in order to pursue a more profitable alternative. South Sudan has reinstated a royal family 115 years after its last king was killed fighting British colonial rule. We'll also be talking about the Starbuks unionization drive, which has been mentioned by Jacobin, an update on that. We'll be talking about Chinese satellite, a Chinese rubbish collector satellite has been spotted in space cleaning up old satellites. An article from Jacobin on corporations will literally kill you to turn a profit. Pablo Escobar's hippos face an uncertain future. In Mauritius, an ecological survey of the Chagos Islands, which are disputed with Britain and the home of the US airbase Diego Garcia, will be taking place. We are going to be talking about the truckers' strike in Canada, or the truckers, the incident going on with the truckers, the occupation of Ottawa with truckers. There's also been a massive breakthrough in nuclear fusion technology in the UK. The Olympics, the Winter Olympics, have opened in Beijing, and Eileen Gu has won a gold medal for China. Starlink satellites, so that's Elon Musk's company Starlink, their satellites have been seen burning up in the atmosphere. Uganda has to pay Congo $325 million for invading it during a conflict in the early 2000s. We also have, in this episode, an update to the Ukraine situation from the Russian perspective. We have an interesting commentary from a top individual from the Moscow University, which trains the diplomats or experts for the Russian foreign ministry, and his view on the Russian side to the Ukrainian crisis. And in the end, we have a video from Jonathan Pye to share about Boris Johnson. So let's begin with the truckers in Canada. So, Jin, we've got a massive strike, or I don't know what to call it, a protest, a strike, an occupation. It seems to be
Sure. Yeah. All of the above.
Describe it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe let's just describe first. So this started, I think, if you actually look at it, it actually started more like 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. It wasn't this week necessarily, but it really has come to a head. So go ahead.
Yeah. So it's this. Like you said, first of all, it first started as like a more of a Canadian kind of thing against the mask mandate, and it's kind of this. Already, it was beginning to show the sign of just how far the Western left, in this case specifically on the North American continent, has detached itself from the working class. Instead of caring for the working class and workers, it cares more about being informationally correct, as in like. So please refer to our last episode with our honored guest Vasio, who talked about it's more than just politically correct, right? Because what we call being politically correct comes from this kind of institutionalized control of information, and then calling it science, right? So the left has, here in the West, after the fall of the Black Panther Party and all that, has definitely moved on to like caring way more about aligning with that and aligning with imperialism than aligning with workers. So then what happens? Well, the workers, they're still there. So if the left doesn't take them, the right will.
Right.
And so we are seeing that when I first heard about this 2 weeks ago, it was held in Canadian politics as like a victory for grassroots right-wing politics. And Canadian politicians have taken, some new Canadian politicians wants to take this opportunity to like brand themselves as like one of those people, to basically do all the tokenism of like dressing with like casual shirts, talking in like playing language and slangs to try to get votes, the classic political stunts. And the greater point, I would say, and why we're covering this story first, At least from my perspective, none of these shows are like pre-rehearsed or anything. For me, is that we have a very peculiar dialectical situation, which is that on the one hand, yes, this total control of this liberal total control of information, and this the subsequent kind of liberal government behaviors that is based on profit for corporations instead of the benefit of the people. That's very fascistic, right? That's just straight up fascism in the sense of like this unquestioned authority that is in service for finance capital, whether directly or indirectly, whatever may be the case, right? Hitler served a Western finance capital indirectly. Yeah. So in that sense, it's just straight up fascism. So it is correct to protest against that. But at the same time, it brings about the collapse and the balkanization of the United States even further, because like, what are they doing? Well, they're basically dumping gasoline onto the burning fire that is the breaking down, that is the deteriorating American supply chain, right? And the supply chain is the backbone of a nation or any society, just ever since the first days of antiquity and recorded history, right? And to be adding fuel to that fire by not only shutting down transportation, but straight up occupying the biggest highways routes between the U.S. and Canada borders. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
It brings about a situation where, yes, it is correct to bring down the kind of imperialist apparatus. There's no doubt about that. But what there is doubt about is that is there a sufficient socialist plan to be able to maintain the lives of the working class people of this continent once everything has indeed gone down the drain? The answer is no. I'm just going to very simply tell you, like, everybody does not have a plan for that. Nobody does. The people that has a plan for, like, themselves, their own, like, very few elite groups of how they're going to bail it out of America or whatever. Or another exception may be like cults who have a few hundred, people with a few hundred guns, and they are able to like do some sort of like a Waco type shenanigans amidst all
Yes.
like it's a very complex situation of a race, a kind of race to the bottom, really. So that's I was like to talk any further about this from a socialist angle would to be talking about socialist organizing and the principles of organization of state building and all that, which would be way too blown of a conversation. So I'm going to pause it here and see what.
Sure. No. I think I wanted to comment on the first few things you said there, which, if you think about this, yes, as a right. So, as you mentioned about having an elite, I suppose an elite gatekeeping sort of like follow an authority, listen to the big clever man, refer to authority, and I suppose you said it was fascistic in nature, whatever. But I think this does remind me of a couple of other movements that have happened over the last sort of 10 years or maybe 8 years, where you've had a movement emerge and you have a discord or a sort of a split amongst the left. So this is where you can see gaps emerge or inconsistencies between this idea of the left. So you have the, I guess, more middle class, upper, I suppose educated, whatever you want to call it, sort of blue collar, also white collar left, if you want to call it that, who call themselves socialists and communists and leftists, and they'll talk about the working class. But then when the unsophisticated working class does do something, they have all these commentaries and all these criticisms to make and are very sort of, there's almost like a fly in their soup about how it appears. They're like, oh well, is it a convoy? I mean, they're all, and the first thing you'll see, the first casualty of this conversation is usually that they're not working class. So this also happened with like people not being willing to accept that January 6th was also a large element of working class, and Trump supporters are working class. So there's a real sort of the first casualty here has been that these truck drivers aren't working class because they have a truck, they own their truck, so they own the means of production. So they're not working class. They're petty bourgeois. So this is usually the first thing. I mean, there might be some truth to that. Sure, they have the truck.
But I just want to make the remark.
Like, slave away, driving many hours. I don't really think they put
right. Like, what does that say then about the people that are making those comments, who are just sitting on their phones and laptops all day on Twitter, complaining about being a pundit? Like, are they working class? No, absolutely not.
Right. So the thing about this is that the first casualty is no, they're not working class, and then the next thing is, of course, they will isolate and pick and say, okay, look, there's a Confederate flag, there's a KKK reference. These are white supremacists, they're racist. So and these people are certainly in those groups. There are racists and white supremacists in these groups. There are people. There are pictures of people with Confederate flags. It's true. And it's, but if you notice, though, this is also the same. They had the same thing for the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest movement in France. There were also allegations that this was these were fascists. To them, too, there were also allegations like this made at the time. And also if you come on to things like Brexit, talking about Brexit, they're like, Brexit it's a racist vote. Meanwhile, it was the majority of the country. So apparently now everyone in the UK was a racist. Well, the majority of people in the UK were racists. And even people that were brown or black who voted for Brexit were also racists, apparently. So this thing of, I suppose, a split in the left, where you've got the, I don't know what term to use here, but whatever, the upper side, the white collar side, the metropolitan left, which is upset, likes certain things in a certain way, and then you have the deplorables, in the words of Hillary Clinton, represent the working class in many respects.
Giant mutually reciprocating echo chamber, as we talked about before.
Sure.
It's just completely brain dead, and that's the danger of it, right? When this kind of brain dead politics gets out of hand, this is what we get.
Yeah. I think that the final thought on this one for me is, even amongst the truckers, I think 85% of them are vaccinated. So this whole thing is about vaccinations and mask mandates. So, I mean, on the statistics, it does seem that, the people that are protesting are, I guess, a minority of truckers. They don't represent all of them. But again, should the left, socialist, communists, come out and berate people that are kind of really just concerned about their jobs, and this is about hardship. This is a protest about them losing livelihood. That's at the heart of it. They are out there and protesting because they're going to lose their jobs and going to lose their homes.
There is one thing that the white collar liberal left, that left has a quotation mark around that, that is not allowed to admit is if there's one thing that they're not allowed to admit, is that it is the fault of the system. Two things. And it's a part of the same thing. That one, it's the fault of the capitalist governments in the first place to begin with, for putting the people, the masses, and especially the workers, into this kind of situation of a kind of fate to complete, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. And two, the only way to resolve that is not through more compliance with the same government regime that messed it up for everyone in the first place to begin with, but to build the true power of the people, for the people to gain, to be able to have true power and gain victory. What you'll notice is that essentially people can admit to either one or the other, but you cannot be both, because being both simultaneously means that you're an existential threat to the entire imperialist system. And well, isn't that what socialists are supposed to be? Like,
right. Okay, well, let's move on to something a bit more positive and a bit more inspiring, rather than the cannibalism of the left on its own movements. potential, at least allies, I suppose. Nuclear fusion. So there's a bit of breakthrough in nuclear fusion, which we mentioned at the start. So this is in the UK. Nuclear fusion, if you're not sure what that is, so normal nuclear energy is done by fission, so splitting the atom. This is fusion, so this is bringing the atom together. Hydrogen atoms brought together, and I believe the byproduct is helium. I'm not quite sure, but yes. So this here we go. So sorry. So this was at a UK-based JET laboratory. They broke the world record for the amount of energy it can extract by squeezing together two forms of hydrogen. Yes. So if nuclear fusion can be successfully recreated on Earth, it holds out potential it holds a potential virtually unlimited supplies of low carbon, low radiation energy. Okay, so the experiment produced 59 megajoules of energy over 5 seconds. So it's very small. This is more than double what was achieved in similar tests back in 1997. So obviously it's not a massive energy output, but so for example, just to give a context, that's 60 kettles worth of water.
Quick comment. Nuclear fusion is how the sun works. Right. How it is able to stay highly continue to burn, give out energy for billions of years and for billions of more years to come, right? And so, of course, if you are here on Earth,
sure, this is something that people at Caleb Maupin and the CPI are very fond of as well. They love fusion, build Fusion City. If you are wondering, okay, but China's more advanced. China's already done this. This facility, it's called the ITER facility, ITER facility. It's in southern France, and it's supported by a consortium of world governments, including EU, US, China, and Russia. So this is not a East versus West project. This is an international project. So we have to take some even more sort of positive from this, in the fact that we have some global collaboration on this, which is good. And China and Russia are involved, which makes it more likely to be sold for a better price, at least particularly in China's case.
Sure.
Sure. So I mean, I don't really think there's much more to this. It's not a massive breakthrough. It's a significant breakthrough, but it's not like they've made the it's not like a fusion reactor has been made. So I was listening to another sort of some news podcast yesterday. The joke about fusion technology is that it's
always 20 years away.
50. They're like,
okay.
50 years away. It's been 50 years away for 50 years, but they do feel like it's coming along. That this is a significant breakthrough in the sense that we are marching towards fusion technology, fusion energy. But
watch the world break into chaos once that actually happens. At least in the current capitalist configuration.
Well, sure. So my comment on this is it wasn't in relation to nuclear energy, fusion energy, but there was a story about, or some reports about solar energy being problematic for some of the energy companies because it was just too cheap. It was too. They weren't. It wasn't profitable. So I was like, we can't do this because this we're capturing so much energy. The value and how much we could sell it for, it doesn't make sense in the model, and we won't make enough money. It's just
the entire energy industry in the Western world is that way. It's built like a pyramid scheme where every chain in the process is like compartmentalized, and so therefore, in order for every part of the process to make profit, right? And after like 3 or 4 or 5 layers of supply chain companies selling it to the next for higher and higher and higher prices, you get like a 300% profit margin. Where everything is way overpriced, but at the end of it's unsustainable at the end of the day, right?
Sure.
Like you said, it is so cheap to produce and so cheap to install and so cheap to set up and can produce so much energy depending on your climate, if you're like in some very foggy place that never sees the sun, then like forget about that,
Right.
But like in generality, right?
Right.
It works that way, and it's antithetical to capitalism.
But even if you are in a cloudy place, so bear in mind you still have the grid, right? You still have electric cables, steel cables linking you up to where there is sun. So
it just won't be like directly solar, like on your
Oh, and
building.
you okay? Yes, yeah. If you're talking about like off the grid man by himself with a solar panel, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, but you have another technology story for us, Jin. Starlink.
Oh yeah.
Two satellite stories. Let's go with the bad one first.
Sure. The big science man, the Lord Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars,
Mm,
Elon Musk's Starlink project.
yes.
More than a dozen satellites has been destroyed by
Mm,
regular
mm,
kind of geological caused magnetic storm, I guess you can say.
yes.
So, like, what that is basically like the Earth. The core of the Earth is liquid, right? Liquid
Yeah.
molten lava, metal. Uh,
Uh-huh.
so, as metal parts rub against each other, it generates a magnetic field, right?
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
electric generators or anything works. So, of course, the same thing, like where you have a liquid ball of a giant amount of metal at the center of the Earth, it'll create. Yeah, because it's liquid, it's swirling, right? As the planet
Yeah.
spins and travels throughout the space, the cosmos around the sun, it generates electric, magnetic irregularities that
Right.
space traveling things have to watch out for.
Right. Right.
So,
I just have to correct you,
they
Jen.
didn't watch out for that. The whole philosophy behind these kinds of projects, ventures ran by Silicon Valley shenanigans, is that you just pump out a load of future-looking pods or blocks or whatever, and then it's like technological trash that's just like dumped into the environment, be it like in Earth atmosphere or out of atmosphere,
Mhm,
completely irresponsibly, and
mhm.
just like grift your way to say like, oh, this is futurism. And so, like, this is the kind of stuff that happens. And there's a very real risk with it. Ever since the Starlink ever came out, which is like way back in like 2017, I believe, if not earlier.
Right. Right.
I was like already saying to my friends, like, this is not a good idea. Why? Because when you have like that many small satellites that are irresponsible, hard to
Mhm,
damage control,
mhm, mhm, mhm.
up there, once they call because like the near Earth orbit is already crowded with
Right.
satellites,
Right. 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 Right.
and then
Right.
if one satellite is destroyed, so like by definition, one piece shreds into like many more, right? And then
Yeah.
those pieces are traveling at the speed that is faster than bullet to then
Mhm,
come into
mhm.
impact with other satellites, and then other satellites, and then other satellites. Before you know it, you will have a domino effect of all near Earth orbits, anything man-made, just being completely knocked out. That includes things, including but not limited to GPS, how the guidance for planes, for ships, for cars. What it gets only gets worse from here.
Right.
The
Right. Right.
internet runs through
Sure. Sure.
and radio, whatever kind of communication that relies on satellites, anything. The global atomic clock, which sets the standardized time for every single piece of electronic device that everyone is using.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
All of that is just completely gone if
Sure.
such a
Sure.
scenario were to happen. And Starlink, and also by Jason, anything that's like Starlink, where you just irresponsibly dump hundreds of small satellites into the orbit, is going to be the perpetrator of exactly that kind of scenario.
It is pretty worrying that this many sat. So just to correct you, Jen, it wasn't 12; it was 40. 40 of the satellites actually fell out.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah. So basically, it was all yeah. So they launched 49 satellites last week.
Uh-huh.
Wait 1 second. Yes. Yeah. 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 49 were launched. 40 of them fell out. But yeah, just as you described, magnetic storm, geomagnetic storm did this. But yeah, you're entirely right. Like the model of having hundreds or thousands of tiny satellites covering all of near Earth orbit with all the stuff that's already up there, it's a little bit concerning. Yeah, because
Yeah,
as you just said,
and that's why
so much
like countries
infrastructure.
like China and Russia have been developing satellites that cleans up space
Well,
debris.
we will go straight into that one then. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that I don't want to berate and sort of beat on old Musk too much. I mean, they
Oh, you
are
can do that all day. I've got more coming if you want.
okay. Okay, then I'll be the balance. So, yeah, I mean, it is right now. They are providing internet to broadband to people in New Zealand, rural New Zealand. So the concept is working. It is working. But so
Right.
I don't know enough more about it to defend it. So, but I know that people are using it. So let's go on to that story then about the Chinese satellite that has been cleaning up other satellites. So this was reported. So this actually wasn't reported by the Chinese. Someone else saw it happening and commented on it. So I'm sure find the story. Here we go. Chinese space cleaner spotted grabbing and throwing away old satellites. So last month, a private satellite tracking company spotted a Chinese spacecraft apparently grabbing and throwing a dead satellite away into a graveyard orbit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this satellite. So talking about also, you were saying about dead satellites in low Earth orbit or in any orbit. This one. So apparently, this is a Chinese SJ-21 satellite was seen on January 22nd, changing its usual place in the sky to approach a decommissioned satellite, Compass G2. A few days later, it attached and then obviously tugged it into a different direction and flung it off onto a different orbit, a graveyard orbit that's not important to us, I guess. But yeah, just talking about sort of, I guess, cleaning up your litter and looking after space in space. This particular satellite that they threw away was also a failed satellite, but a Chinese failed satellite. So this was a Compass G2 or Baidu C2 G2. So this is the Chinese version of GPS, basically. One of their failed satellites that launched in 2009, and it's been just kind of stuck in space for more than 10 years. So they sent up the SJ-21 in 2021, and
you need to do that in order for space to be a sustainable option whatsoever at all. Because, or else, like, truly, you're just accelerating the inevitability of locking all of humanity on Earth, and we will never be able to travel anywhere to that's not planet Earth ever again.
Right.
Which, like, that's just irresponsible to the highest degree.
Sure, we should,
because like understand that, like, if such a scenario were to happen, these space trash would stay in orbit for like hundreds of years, if not thousands. So
it'd be,
it's something that has to be done in order for any country or entity to call itself like a responsible agent, a responsible actor in the space sector.
Yes. No, I think so. I agree entirely. I was going to play the video here, but it's just it looks like there's lots of noise coming out of this video, so we're going to skip that and not play it.
Okay.
But to be honest, it's just general footage of a rocket taking off. There isn't actually video of this, thing.
There was a drawing of
a picture. But to be honest, it's definitely not what it looked like.
Right, exactly.
It looks like a claw from one of those machines that you have as a kid.
Yeah, it does.
So no, it didn't. No one. I don't think that's what it looked like.
No.
So let's move on to our next one. So yeah, space. We should respect space and not leave litter in space. So we've also then got this story about. Let's talk about Eileen Gu in the Olympics. So obviously, Winter Olympics opened last week in Beijing. I was very lucky. I managed to go. I got to go and watch it, which is awesome. Great ceremony. A lot of procedures to get in because of the COVID bubble and all that kind of stuff, but worth watching, and I do recommend watching it. No offense to Tokyo, I do feel like this opening ceremony was a lot better than theirs.
There's a lot of shenanigans with the Tokyo Olympics that I'm not sure if we have time for today, but
I don't think we have time to discuss it all. That. But I think we should cut straight to our two stories for this. So the first one is about the Weigo thing. So they picked two people to light the flame. to carry the torch at the last moment to light a giant snowflake, which was made up of all the country's mini snowflakes. Very beautiful piece of art there, and they had used older athletes to carry the flame. So an athlete from the 1950s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and then the last two athletes were both born in 2001. So they're whatever 20 or 21 years old.
Oh wow, younger than me.
Right, and they lit the flame together. And one of these athletes was a Uyghur, and so the New York Times and the West went crazy, and the Global Times made an interesting comment on this when they said, basically, damned if you do and damned if you don't. So
right,
because they had used a Uyghur person to light the flame. Firstly, the New York Times questioned whether this person was a Uyghur. They said Uyghur heritage, Uyghur name, so sort of undermining the fact that they may have even been one. But then also identified this as being provocative, so sort of taking the issue head on. Sort of, they just whitewashed it with Uyghurness. That was one line, and of course the other line was if they hadn't if they'd used anyone else.
Oh, right. Where's the representation?
Probably would have said, they didn't mention the Uyghurs. Where were the Uyghurs? There was no mention of it. They ignored it. So this was.
Better yet, they disappeared.
They disappeared, right?
No, that's something that.
Yeah, of course, they've all been killed. So there's none of them left anymore, apparently. Anyway, so that was the first story relating to the Olympics. The second one is about Eileen Gu. I don't know if you want to talk about this one, Jin, or not.
Not really, because the controversy surrounding her and her joining China and becoming a Chinese citizen and for
well, that is the story, right? That is the interesting
why I say that is not out of anything against her. It's just that the people that are against her and are making a controversy out of this is your typical colonially-minded, colonially-minded people. I mean, I don't even want to call them people. That thinks that the only form of naturalization or assimilation that's allowed is if you join a white settler colony. And that's the only legitimate or sincere form of expressing and deciding what your nationality is supposed to be.
Right.
How does that work? I mean, right now, China is the only developing country that has rose to the status where shenanigans like this starts to happen on a larger and larger scale. Imagine what were to happen if other developing countries, hypothetically, let's say India or Ethiopia or Brazil, you name it, starts to develop towards a more and more advanced state of living standard and so on, to the point where their overseas diaspora wants to return to their homeland. So, the rejection of this idea is just it's incredibly 1800s minded. I don't think it deserves any recognition. So,
So if you aren't familiar, she was 15 when she decided to change her nationality, I believe, and she's now 18, and she's now competing for China. So she had to renege or drop her U.S. citizenship, and in order to compete for China, and she won gold. So Americans, lots of American commentators are, to use an American phrase, very butthurt about this.
They are very salty. But they have been salty ever since the barrage of Sputnik moments that China has brought upon.
Right, sure. I mean, her mom was grew up. She's from Shanghai, but grew up in Beijing. So I think it's completely reasonable for her to compete for China.
No! You can only want to join the land of the free. It's people shouldn't have individual agency. What happened to liberalism?
Right. Yeah. So again, I'm not going to go too much into this because it's at the moment the Western press and a lot of commentators are kind of. There's all sorts of bizarre stories coming out of the Olympics. So I don't want to get into all of them, but there's one about this Dutch news presenter who was in the street broadcasting during the opening ceremony. And some security guard was pushing him and trying to get him out of the street, and he was like, "Oh, you see, this is what people in Beijing have to always go over. You know, this is what it's like a dictatorship, authoritarian." Really bizarre. Like if you speak Chinese, the guy's just like, "Please, I've been sweating here. Like, can you just report from the pavement? Just from the pavement. Go over there. Just not here." So it's just, but
Yeah,
you know,
no, and
the narrative,
it's classic.
the narratives
Because
already.
Right. Interesting little tale. So in many countries, what journalists, because like in the West, the profession of journalism is so heavily tied to all the three-letter agencies, and like the three-letter agencies, if you look at their training lectures that's publicly available, deliberately says on YouTube that some of their disguises are as journalists. So what tends to happen is that they when they go to other countries, other countries' security services are very suspicious of these so-called journalists, and then they have a tendency of like knocking on your apartment or hotel door and telling you that your visa is over, get out, you're deported or whatever. Sure. But in China, we don't have that. Our law enforcement system isn't built like that. Essentially, it's not available in English literature because Western information control doesn't like, anything positive to do with China. But if you look at the written kind of decrees of the first premier of China, Zhou Enlai, which in the Chinese revolutionary history was the Chinese intelligence underground operations head. What he basically said is like he has a very strict, extremely strict list of protocols for like what the PRC security services are not allowed to do. Mm-hmm. Among those includes secret kidnappings, assassinations, secret coercions of any kind, except in the cases of hunting down traitors of the party that were party members originally. That's the only case where that's allowed. So then, like these journalists, they come to China with full, even if they're not of the three-letter agencies and are perfectly innocent, they're under the impression that like China, because of how it's like propagated out to be, and they're not aware of these kinds of protocols. Like we would be like sending security agents after them and be knocking on their doors, setting up wiretaps, so on and so forth. Because that's what the security services of other countries do. So then, like any time when like your COVID-19 prevention volunteers come knocking on your door, or like your local neighborhood committee volunteers that just like come to check up or like give you like some like just trying to explain to you like the how things work, like where's the trash, where's the laundry and all that. They think that those people are three-letter agency spies. And since those people, because China is a very communal society for the most part, those people come pretty often, and they are like completely untrained in like any kind of spy activity, because they're literally just like people that lives in the neighborhood. They think that they interpret that to be that China is such a totalitarian police state that secret agents are in every street block in every neighborhood.
Right.
So it's again completely brain dead situation where you cannot convince them otherwise.
Right.
But what do you do? So here we are.
Right. Yeah. I don't have enough time to comment on like how inconsistent people are about how the narrative is already written, right? Authoritarianism, China. So that's already decided. So you just fit the story into that narrative. So we haven't got time to jump through all the hoops and explain every single one of how the flaws of each of these stories. So I mean, I think we have to. That will always. That's going to come up again in another story.
Yes, we fully expect that.
Let's move on from Eileen Gu. So that was the Olympics, Eileen Gu, the opening ceremony, Winter Olympics. So quick one we need to go on to. So we've still got 3 more stories that we want to cover. So a nice article from usually their analysis on certain things like China and the Soviet Union. Not great, but Jacobin has written an article about corporations which it's a short one. Corporations would literally kill you to turn a profit. So I should put this up for a second. I don't know if you want to make any comments about this, Jin, before I read it.
Well,
I mean, it's not.
sure, I mean, Starlink. Corporations will ruin the future of entire human civilization in order to make a profit.
Yeah.
So,
this article does mention some of the big hitting stories about corporations. So Coca-Cola killed trade unionists in Latin America.
Yeah.
General Motors built vehicles known to catch fire.
Nestle.
Tobacco companies suppressed cancer research, and Boeing knew that its planes were dangerous. Corporations don't care if they kill people as long as it's profitable. So this story, it's pretty good. It's not very long, only, I don't know, probably 800 words or so. It's mainly talking about Boeing. And if you aren't familiar, Boeing had the 737 MAX. And in order for it to be more sellable to airlines, they packaged it as a complete new aircraft, which you didn't need to train your pilots on. You could just, if they had flown a similar older model of this aircraft, they could just jump from one seat to another, no training required because they were so similar. And they did that because, of course, the airlines then wouldn't have to go, okay, well, if we buy these new aircraft, we have to spend X amount of hours training our pilots to use them. It would be a no-brainer. They go, okay, we just buy the plane and the pilot jumps in and that's it. Cool, great, cheap, perfect. We'll buy it, no problem. I mean, I'm simplifying. But the reason one second. The problem was that the computer system, they had installed some sort of computer system, safety system that was different, and the pilots didn't know it existed. It wasn't even in the manual, and it did certain things, which led to those two crashes.
Yes, I know exactly what that is because I was personally tracking that story when it first happened.
Go ahead.
Essentially, what it is this. The 737 MAX, what the difference between that compared to the original 737, which has flown for a long time, is they essentially put new engines on it, so that's more powerful and fuel efficient. So, what's the selling point? Well, two things. One is that for all 737 aircrafts, you can just not only does the pilot not have to do any new training to get to fly the new aircraft. So, saving cost on training. The airplane can just not go through too many upgrades. Very simple engine swap, and then you're good to go. And it was supposed to be, if everybody remember, there's this thing between Boeing and Airbus, right? The two big civilian aircraft heads, industry leaders. So it's the difference between two aircraft, two engine aircrafts and four engine aircrafts. So the selling point of this is that, of course, it claims that it can do the job of the Airbus 4-engine airliners with only two engines. That was the main selling point.
I see.
But here's the problem. Not only is everything that they're being said is true, but so planes needs to maintain this very careful balance of its center of balance and its center of lift.
Mm-hmm.
If it's too far off, the plane crashes. It tumbles, literally. Mm-hmm. Or if it's a little bit far off, the nose will tilt up or tilt down. So, of course, because they were saving on cost, when they slapped on the new engines that are bigger and heavier, they didn't redo the math. They did not want to redo the weight distribution of the aircraft. So they know the center of balance is messed up. Mm-hmm. So in order to calibrate for that, you need because it's not thrown off by too much. You can counter that by computer systems where every time you notice the plane is tilting in the wrong direction, it'll the computer will automatically pull back in the other direction a little bit, so that overall the flight experience is smooth and then you fly in a straight line as you would like to. But the problem is that they were trying to save cost on even that software, which is actually critical to the safety of the 737 MAX, because they have messed up in the previous parts, right?
Yeah.
So this software was sold to some contractor in India who had terrible programmers and coders. wrote this like program that is completely once again brain dead. I think that's like a theme of today's episode and just like capitalism in general, where instead of micro calibrations that is very time sensitive, where anytime it starts to do the tilting a little bit, it corrects it like right there. What it does is that the nose of the plane tilts up. And anytime it notices that the nose of the plane is tilting up, but after like say 30 seconds, it will like push the control lever of the plane, the nose of the plane, just like downward by like a lot over like 30 seconds, in like one push. So of course you can imagine, plane gets to a not sufficiently high enough altitude. When it starts to notice the nose tilt, the computer just like pushes the plane downward, downward, and downward again until it crash. Even though no hardware of the plane is like wrong, nothing is wrong with any of the mechanics of the aircraft. And what's worse about that is that the pilot cannot override that. You can hear on like this Mayday calls of these pilots during their last moments of their lives and the lives of hundreds of passengers that what is going on. The stick shift is like going down and I cannot pull it back no matter how hard I try to pull. And I have no control of the aircraft. I repeat, I have no control.
Right. And then those two planes crashed, so a lot of people died because Boeing wanted to sell more planes. And actually, one of our comments from Cancerbox, the FAA cleared that nonsense, probably the most transparent example of corruption when the entire world grounded them. So the FAA is supposed to be an independent regulator, perhaps ruling in favor of Boeing. So good comment.
China was the first aviation authority to shut that plane down. And at the time, like the Americans were really mad about it. Oh, how dare you!
Right.
I
do. I think it's probably because a lot of the passengers on one of those flights were Chinese. It was going to Beijing, wasn't it? Right. Okay. So let's move on from that. I mean, not big. Not a revelation. Corporations kill us for money, or are willing to kill for money. Who would have known? Who would have known? Who would have guessed? Which our last two stories. So we've got to sort of brush over a couple of things here. Firstly, we want to talk about. Let's just do the Johnson & Johnson story quickly because it flows with the people picking profit over people kind of thing. Companies picking profit over people. So this is from Reuters and New York Times together. No, sorry, Reuters. New York Times. It talks about Johnson & Johnson. So Johnson & Johnson had a facility in Holland, in the Dutch city of Leiden, which was making its vaccine. So this is Johnson & Johnson making the COVID-19 vaccine. But production stopped last year. Because apparently they were told to started instead making an experimental but potentially more profitable vaccine to protect against an unrelated virus. So despite Johnson & Johnson making lots of other vaccines, in order to make money, even though we're in this global pandemic, they turned off the plant and switched it to a vaccine of some other disease.
Conspiracy theory time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is are you going to make one, or you say?
Yes, I'm going to make one.
Go ahead.
Conspiracy theory time. They discontinued that vaccine because it is the only deactivated vaccine that the United States manufactures. It wants to go full mRNA vaccine, but mRNA vaccine has more shenanigans, let's just say, and insert all sorts of like global depopulation conspiracy in here. But sorry, just wanted to add that.
But so this goes well with the story about Boeing making planes that kill people so they can make money. Johnson & Johnson, at a time of global pandemic, switching to a more profitable vaccine for something that's probably not as bad as the pandemic virus situation. So anyway, the last story is actually coming back to this Ukraine-Russia situation. So the New York Times interviewed I have to find this story 1 second. Where is it? damn it. Yeah, the New York Times interviewed a foreign diplomat expert. Just 1 second, let me get this up here. The name of the guy is, hold on. Yeah, we go. Andrei Sushentsov. So he's Dean of the School of International Relations at MGIMO, which is the elite Moscow university run by the Russian Foreign Ministry. So I suppose we could say he does have an insight into Russian foreign policy if he's one of the deans of the School of International Relations. So he described the current standoff as only the first step in a drawn-out Russian effort to force the West to agree to a new security architecture for Eastern Europe. It was a characterization of the start of a more high-stakes phase in Russia's years-long conflict with the West that is gaining currency in Moscow's foreign policy circles. So Russia's aim, according to Mr. Sushentsov, is to keep the threat of war ever present and thus compel negotiations that Western officials have avoided until now. For too long, he said in an interview, people in Western Europe have been lulled into thinking that a new war on the continent was impossible. For Mr. Putin, that point of view needs to be changed, Mr. Sushentsov said, to compel the West to accept Russia's demands. Quote, what's important in this suspense, this feeling of a pre-war situation. People are spoiled by an overly long peace. They think of security as a given, as something that is attained for free, rather than something that must be negotiated. This is a mistake. For the West, that approach could mean being drawn into a new sort of forever war, a conflict consuming ever more time and treasure with no clear exit strategy. The lesson of the chaotic Afghan withdrawal last summer to Mr. Putin may have been that the US has no stomach for a distant conflict and Ukraine is distant to the US, but not to Russia. Okay. So I'm just seeing if there's anything else here in this thing here. Any thoughts on that, Jin? What are your
lots? Specifically, what this person is talking about is a very wise kind of understanding of politics as how it has always been for thousands of years. It's a part of the rejection of the end of history as proposed by Benjamin Fukuyama and all that. That somehow there's this sentiment going around that like the West and the world is like now completely just different. It has completely changed because modernity. But then if you actually look at like what has materially changed in these Western systems and Western architectures of the state of the finance and all that, nothing has changed. So then, like what Newton's law of physics. If an object is continuing traveling in a trajectory, it will continue to do so unless an outside force or change has intervened, right? Well, in the West, certainly nothing like that has happened. And so to just hold up this delusion that, war will never happen is a lie that the West uses through its narrative domination that it tells the people of rest of the world so that the people of those countries put down their arms so that the West can invade more easily. If it's essentially like there's a Chinese general turned college professor that passed away in 2015, but before of late stage stomach cancer, unfortunately. But very devout communist, and what he said is the West's use of these kinds of narrative and concepts against non-Western aligned, non-finance imperialism aligned countries is much like the effect of artillery barrage, where you stun and disable, cripple, and disorganize and partially incapacitate a nation and a sovereign people before they can even put up a resistance to Western intervention. So, like, of course, the New York Times is going to interpret what the Russian professor said as, like, oh, Russia wants war. But in reality, like, what he is actually talking about is pointing out this hypocrisy and how it is dangerous to a sovereign people. And if people collectively want their sovereignty, they should resist that kind of nonsense capitalist pacifist, I guess you can say,
Yeah.
narrative, and actually be real and be on a kind of a near peer level of conception and action against imperialism. That's what that actually means, and I want to make sure everybody walks away with the right idea. That's all.
Yeah, I think the last thing that guy said, which it's his direct quote, so we don't have to worry about too much analysis from New York Times bleeding into it, is that he says 6 months ago no one was talking about shaking up the post-Soviet world order, and now Russia is drawing a line in the sand, saying this is you shall not pass. There's no more expansion. You said no, we won't go beyond Berlin, or we won't go beyond Germany, and now you're talking about, or potentially, gearing towards Ukraine becoming a NATO member. And also bear in mind, like you said, this idea of, I think he says, people in the West have gotten used to the idea of there being no more war, of peace, of we've moved beyond that.
The case.
But that's the thing, right? So this exactly, like you said, the idea of this is the end of history. There's no more wars, but actually, the US played a very heavy hand in Ukraine in 2014. Victoria Nuland, as we've mentioned before, handpicking the new Ukrainian situation, regime, whatever you want to call it. So the idea of peace is actually an illusion. There's not been peace in Iraq. There's not been peace in Ukraine. There's not been peace in Yemen or Palestine or Libya or Syria. So the idea of peace is only for the Western consumption. So the idea that other nations, that if you engage in acts of war, that it's you're breaking the order. You're disturbing peace, but there's not been peace.
Well, no, other people deserve sovereignty too. I mean, if there is no sovereignty, how can they have people's politics, democracy, not in the exclusively Western sense, but in the general sense? If you cannot have sovereignty, there is like nothing. And when you can determine nothing, well, like how do we know that? Well, look at U.S. security forces intervention in like forever. Since when did any of it work?
Yeah. So the last thing we're going to jump onto, Jin, and for everyone, is a wonderful piece from Jonathan Pye. So if you don't know who Jonathan Pye is, I'm going to play this clip. I'm not going to play the whole thing. There's lots of swearing. So if you are with children or listening to this in your car, I don't know, just bear in mind there's a lot of swearing in this video. It's Jonathan Pye talking about Boris Johnson, and he makes some pretty great comments. Let me just get this on here. Okay. About Boris Johnson being a liar. So I'm going to cut ahead. If you want to watch the whole thing, it is from the New York Times, an opinion piece. It's on YouTube, but I'll cut ahead to some of the good bits here. 1 second. Of course, if you're not aware, Boris Johnson has been caught lying about these drinking parties. So let's go here. Put the sound up for you there.
He's a liar.
Can you hear that, Jen?
Trumpian is the ease with which he tells porkies, but Boris is a product of a system that, porky pies, lies, Cockney rhyming slang, apples and pears, and you don't have that, do you? No, of course you don't, American audience. Sorry, New York Times. Boris Johnson is a liar. Just keep it simple, stick to that. All right. Let's start from the beginning, okay? It began with a party.
It seems there really might have been a Christmas party at Downing Street.
Staff here in number 10 held a large party, seemingly breaking COVID rules.
2 parties.
New allegations that he broke his own COVID lockdown rules again.
16 of them. 16 separate piss-ups. Most of them when the rest of the country was in full lockdown.
You should not be meeting friends. If your friends ask you to meet, you should say no.
At a time when the Prime Minister was telling us all to have no social contact with friends, colleagues, and, in thousands of instances, dying relatives, when the cops were handing out fines for anyone inviting more than 2 people over for a cup of tea, the people who set those rules were having work drinks, summer garden parties, and later Christmas office quiz nights. But the one that got us really riled up
2 parties were held at number 10 the night before the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral.
Boris was forced to apologise to the Queen when it emerged 2 of those parties took place the night before her husband's funeral. The Queen, she's our head of state, a bit like your president, but she's in her 90s, so she's a lot younger than your guy. So on the day that the Queen sat...
So I'm going to pause there for a second. A nice little slur against Biden there, but this is pretty shocking image here. So talking about aristocracy and the bourgeois and all this kind of stuff, I know it's the Queen. I don't like the Queen. I'm not a fan of the royal family at all, but it is pretty goring, that you've got an old lady at her funeral, at the funeral of her husband.
She's immortal, so yes, she's at her own funeral. I'm kidding.
She's at her funeral, sorry. No. But she's at the funeral of her husband, and no one else is allowed to attend or be with her, or to sort of, they have to socially distance. So it's just basically herself in this picture here. So even though it's the Queen, not a fan, it's pretty terrible if the Prime Minister who makes these rules and tells the Queen follow them, and she can't have anyone else, sort of a shoulder to lean on at the funeral of her husband. And at the same time, while she's sitting alone at the funeral, they're getting pissed. Like the day before and the day after, they were getting like absolutely hammered and drunk at these parties at Downing Street. So pretty terrible press for Boris Johnson. And also the idea of one set of rules for the commoners and one set of rules for the elite, that really rings true. But actually the irony being here that even the rules weren't even applied for the Queen. Even the Queen was following the rules. And the Etonian aristocrats were not. So I'm going to jump ahead to the part where he talks about Eton, just for a bit of a laugh here. So here we go.
Session of posh, upper-class, bumbling idiots who are destined for greatness only because no one has ever or will ever tell them they're not. Boris went to Eton, a sort of Hogwarts for wankers, where you get taught Latin and tax avoidance whilst wearing full evening dress. These people have never spoken to a real person in their life, apart from perhaps their chauffeur. Then on to Oxford, where Boris Johnson was part of the infamous Bullingdon Club, a fun, elite social club for the boys. Activities included smashing up restaurants and burning £50 notes in front of homeless people. Allegedly.
But it was great fun at the time.
So there you go. That's the last thing I'll share. So you can watch the rest of that somewhere. YouTube, in your own time. But I did like just the 2 references to Eton, as he just explained better than I can, a Hogwarts for wankers who learn how to dodge tax while wearing full evening dress, who've never spoken probably to a normal person. And yes, the Bullingdon Club, if you didn't know, that's a real thing. A club for people that went to Oxford and whatnot, elite club, dining club, which they would then go to restaurants and smash up the plates, break the place up. And because they have so much money, they would just then throw money at the restaurant to pay for the damages. So because they're so wealthy, they go to restaurants, destroy them, and just then pay. I think also this is the same kind of culture for that whole led to the whole thing with the pig, that David Cameron had sex with a pig. If you're not familiar with that story too, something else you could read into. So the kind of stuff that these guys get pretty Yeah. No,
you can't just measure that kind of stuff.
I believe it was a pig's head. I don't think it was an actual dead pig. Living pig. The pig was dead. But yeah. But
that's not any better.
Did something with a pig.
I think we're done for today. How about that?
The elite is doing dirty things. But those are the last 2 things we'll comment on for today. So next week we'll be back again to talk about the news of next week and the stories of next week. We'll have some more news from communist parties as well as workers' parties, and we'll see where the truckers' protest goes, as well as if there's any change to the Ukraine situation too. But on quite an unusual note, that's us for this week. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.